Hey YouTube, what's going on, YouTube world? It's your boy Mason Mack. Hitting you with a chilling warning video that I just came upon. I know I was talking about the whole new thing going on with the New York situation with the little clearance they gave us, a little statement. So I wanted to show you another video that I just ran up on. You know what I mean? Shout out to everybody that put me on to the movie, well, to the video. It's more like a movie, but it's a video. And I'm gonna start it right now because I'm intrigued myself. Let's begin.
The U.S. military. We're looking at a Mad Max scenario, a very bad situation. Store shelves are going to be empty. There's going to be no water. The U.S. intelligence knows that Russia and China plan on a nuclear first strike. This war would be preceded, in my opinion, by an EMP strike. They intend to decapitate the U.S. military. We're looking at a Mad Max scenario, a very bad situation. Store shelves are going to be empty. There's going to be no water. Russia is indeed testing the West to see if they will stop him from taking back the former Soviet states, starting with Ukraine. I'm 100% certain we'll see a nuclear war. 100%. There's no doubt in my mind.
Hi, folks. Canadian Prepper here. So today on the channel, I have a very special guest. It's Joel SKOUSEN. He's renowned in the preparedness community. He's the author of the book Strategic Relocation, and he's here to talk all about where you should be when it all hits the fan. Now, above and beyond that, he's also a political commentator, and I would say that his macroeconomic outlook is very on point. And one of the first videos I ever seen of Joel was back in 2013 when he predicted basically that in 8 to 10 years from now, we are likely going to be in a conflict with Russia. And of course, here we are today. So before we started the interview, Joel was mentioning how in order for people to know where the best place to be is when it all hits the fan, you kind of need to know what you're preparing for. So I'm hoping that he's going to take this hour that we have together and explain to us, what are the threats right now that we're facing, and what is his outlook, what are his best guesses as to where this is going to go, and how we can best prepare. So, thanks for coming, Joel.
Well, good to be with you, Nate. My father was born in Canada, so I have Canadian roots, but you're in a very trying time now with the tyranny of Justin Trudeau. But a lot of people in America and Canadians as well are expecting an economic collapse. As an economist, I can tell you that you don't get an economic collapse ever unless it comes with war and occupation where you can't go to work anymore. If you just have a stock market crash, for example, or you go into a recession, even in the Depression, only 25% of people were out of work. I mean, this was not an economic collapse.
Why should you use Miro? When you draw on a whiteboard, no one sees it. With Miro, you can plan together in real time from literally everywhere. It's not just
Yeah, sorry about the commercials, but let's get back to this.
It was devastating because there really wasn't a lot of stored food and residual earnings and wealth in American people. They were poor, they were distributed over rural areas, and that's why it was so hard felt, etc. But today they have a lot of stored wealth in the United States and Canada, as difficult as things are with the not hyperinflation, but inflation, high inflation that we're having. But these things do not cause us to get into a global new world order. The globalists have long used war, Nate, to advance the cause of globalism. That was the whole purpose of World War I, to get us into the League of Nations. And they had the Treaty of Versailles so onerous towards Germany that when the Treaty of Versailles was rejected by the United States Senate, the provisions of the Treaty of Versailles were so onerous that it guaranteed that Germany would rearm again and go to war again. That gave us World War II. We got the United Nations out of World War II. but it doesn't have any enforcement power. It doesn't have any real military power. It doesn't have any taxing power. It doesn't even have the kind of regulatory power that the EU has, which is another form of globalism, more advanced. So they need one more world war to get us into a global world government. And this is the thing that I was predicting that in 2013 and even before. But I prognosticated at that time that it would take them till about 8 to 10 years to get ready militarily to take on the West. I revised that in about 2018 and extended it further into the latter half of this decade, simply because Russia and China still are deploying their top generation stuff. They're just starting to deploy the hypersonic missiles. They still don't have, and they're starting to deploy the Sarmat 2, which 15 maneuvering warheads, et cetera. It's going to take another 5 years to build and deploy all of these things. Now, it doesn't mean that they strike in 5 years. I'm just saying that Russia and China are very wary of the United States military capability and NATO's military capability, as has been demonstrated in the Ukraine war. Everyone thought that because of Russia's massive artillery forces, that's how they generally run a conventional war, is they just blast the hell out of any army with massive artillery barrages, like you've seen in Mariupol and Severodonetsk, where they just leveled the city essentially with artillery. But everything else in the Russian military is broken. It doesn't work very well. They can't do complex air-ground coordination, which they showed in their failed invasion of Kiev. They couldn't give air defense over their convoys. Their convoys were on roads, which you never do in a massive invasion. You get off the roads and disperse. They don't have good friend versus foe identification in their aircraft, for example. So that if you get into a mixed aircraft, and I'm a former Marine Corps fighter pilot, so I know this stuff. But you have to know and be able to have electronic identification of friend or foe so that you can tell who you're going to launch missiles at. And they don't have that. And so it's been very, very difficult for them to send up fighters at the same time they've got missiles in the air, at the same time they've got drones in the air. And so what they do, they put the drones up and nothing else. They put the missiles up and nothing else. Whereas the US and NATO can do very complex, coordinated strike features, which Russia cannot do. So we have, in the military, completely revised our assessment of Russia. It's no longer the big, powerful military that we thought they were. They can't hardly even take Ukraine. In fact, they can only get the Donbass so far, and it's almost at a stalemate. They can't invade Europe. You know, there's a lot of talk about Russia invading Europe or the Baltics. Well, how can they do that? I mean, Europe is huge compared to the Ukraine. If you can't invade and occupy Ukraine, how can you do Europe, let alone the United States? And so my military analysis is that, you know, where Russia is superior to the West is in nuclear throw weight in their ballistic missiles. The United States, for example, has a little over 400 Minuteman III missiles. Due to our stupid adherence to arms control treaties, we removed all 3 warheads from those and replaced it with a single warhead. Now, most Americans don't know that, and I'm sure Canadians don't know that. So the Americans have, in terms of ballistic missiles, we have 400 plus, maybe 425, because we shoot off 1 or 2 missiles every year to test them. And so they started out with 450, and now we're down closer to 400. So Americans don't realize we've only got 400 nuclear missiles to throw at Russia if they should attack us. Russia has over 3,000 warheads mounted on missiles. And now they're doing maneuvering warheads, which cannot be intercepted by our Patriot missile systems or the Aegis missile system. Our anti-ballistic missile systems have no warhead on them. They have a kinetic warhead, meaning a big lump of titanium or depleted uranium that has to make physical contact with the incoming warhead. That's impossible with the new maneuvering warheads at hypersonic speeds. And the U.S. had about a 50% kill rate, even under the best of testing conditions of that. But you see, we are extremely vulnerable. Now, it's my opinion that Canada will not be a nuclear target of the war. Only the U.S. military will be. But this war would be preceded, in my opinion, by an EMP strike. And because most of Canada and most of the population of Canada is within 50 to 100 miles of the U.S. border, you're going to get the effects of that EMP strike, and your grid is going to go down as well. And so that's a very serious thing, because you see, within 3 to 5 days after the grid goes down, especially in big cities, you're going to talk about major pillaging. Store shelves are going to be empty. There's going to be no water. There's going to be no sewer. There's going to be no import of food. I even doubt if a lot of policemen are going to come to work if there's mobs roaming the street and threatening their families. Would you come to work? You know, if there were mobs coming down the street, you'd stay and protect your family. And so I think we're looking at a Mad Max scenario, a very bad situation. And the nuclear strike that I'm anticipating follows about 15 to 20 minutes after the EMP strike. Now, an EMP strike takes about 8 or 9, even possibly 10 nuclear weapons to blanket the entire American and Canadian grid. It's not just one. So forget about Iran, forget about North Korea. It's either Russia or China or both. But the problem that Russia has in using nuclear weapons, and a lot of armchair pundits are talking about Russia taking out a military base in Ukraine as a blackmail thing and saying, if you want more of this, then just try to fight me. But this isn't true at all. With nuclear weapons today, it's either all or none, Nate. In other words, you either launch them all and take down everything in the US and NATO inventory, or you don't do it at all. You don't throw a nuclear weapon out at the, sub-base in Scotland, for example, in the UK, or any of the bases, the submarine bases in France. Because you see, what do you do after you've done that? What do you do if the United States and NATO doesn't submit to the blackmail? And they wouldn't, with only one thing. What would you do? You can't occupy. He doesn't have the military enough to occupy Ukraine, let alone all of Europe, so he can't march in with troops. And it would demand, the public would demand a massive nuclear retaliation. And, 400 missiles can do a lot of damage if they're targeted at Russian military headquarters. Now, we also have about 14 nuclear submarines, but only about 5 or 6 of those are deployed at sea at any one time. And that's a weakness. But a lot of people don't realize that the warheads on those submarine-launched ballistic missiles are relatively small. They cannot penetrate hardened targets. And so they're really only good against cities, and that's not our nuclear doctrine to nuke cities. We need the larger warheads mounted on the ICBMs to hit hardened targets like Yamato Mountain, an underground city in the Ural Mountains that is about the size of the Washington, D.C. metro area underground. And we have never had inspectors in there, but we know that they're manufacturing military facilities. They have bunker systems in there.
Would you say the bombers are useless? Like this day and age, are they almost obsolete, or?
They aren't obsolete, because from a distance they can launch cruise missiles. But Russia has probably the most sophisticated anti-missile system in the S-400 and the S-500 systems. They can shoot down a lot of those cruise missiles. The warheads, if you even have a nuclear warhead on a cruise missile, is very small. Can't do a lot of damage to hardened military targets. It can take out air bases and other things if you mass enough of those. And our bombers can penetrate up to a certain distance, but, Russia's a big territory. You can't go into the middle of Russia and then come back without air refueling, and you're not going to be able to do that with their anti-missile system. So we really depend on missile systems to do it, and we are really way behind. The United States has a new ballistic missile on the table, which they're supposed to have by 2030. I am anticipating this world war will happen before 2030. just because the Chinese and Russians know that a new missile is coming and they're going to want to strike before that new missile is deployed, because it will be much more sophisticated.
Do you think there's a possibility that, because I'm starting to question whether or not the use of a low yield tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine would actually elicit a major response from NATO, or would people just quickly acclimate to the idea of these low yield tactical nukes being utilized in combat? Because it seems like it's not, I'm not sure if I'm totally sold on the idea that NATO would immediately respond with the full force of their military capability with the use of one of these smaller weapons that Russia has in large amounts. What do you think about tactical nukes?
Well, in the first place, no explosion in Ukraine is going to elicit a NATO response, especially if it's nuclear. Now, we're talking about a limited ballistic missile nuclear attack on one of the NATO countries. That would demand a response. You're not going to accept a nuclear strike on a base that's going to kill a lot of civilians as well without responding. That's not the case in Ukraine. Ukraine isn't even going to be allowed to join NATO. Putin, when he came to power, has decided now to start to reestablish the Soviet Union, and Ukraine was first on his list of retaking. Now, they didn't have to retake Belarus because Belarus never did give up its communist past. But they went for Ukraine because Ukraine, you see, has most of the industrial power. They've created most of the ICBMs in the Soviet days were built in Ukraine. And they gave those up, but still it's a military industrial powerhouse that Russia wants back. And it's also the grain capital of the Soviet Union. And so they want to capture all of those things. And most of those things, by the way, are in eastern Ukraine. And so Russia has succeeded in getting most of those. I'm not sure they're going to be able to get past that. But the important thing to remember about this war is that Russia is indeed
Our cargo is a trucking business for hire. We specialize in
testing the West to see if
Yeah, it was good. Boom Lagoon, man. I was just looking at this video. I'm assuming he made it yesterday, but I could tell that this guy has the whole plan, what he thinks gonna happen, how it's gonna happen, when it's gonna happen. So I was like, you know what? Let me see if I post this. You know what I mean? See people start opening their eyes a little bit. A lot of people don't believe that the thing they put out in New York yesterday is real. They think it's something made up. So I'm like, wow. So let me start digging in more. But let me get back. I'm definitely gonna get back into the video because he's giving a lot of good information.
if they will stop him from taking back the former Soviet states, starting with Ukraine. And I'm glad, even though I'm opposed to all the globalist and neocon intervention in all of the world in the phony war on terror, and that was a phony war as well. What Americans and Canadians don't know about our own deep state and the phony wars that we've been involved in. But the deep state is, in fact, prosecuting properly with arms and ammunition this war in Ukraine because they know that we're very, very close to World War III. And I always told people in my World Affairs Brief, this is my geopolitical newsletter I put out every Friday. I told people the deep state and their controlled media will protect Russia and China and downplay the threat during the Soviet years and as China's building up. And they have been downplaying China. That's why they got all of this trade agreements with China and part of the World Trade Organization. We built their military by allowing them to gain billions of dollars in trade. We allowed China to build, and our government knew that. They need these enemies to start a World War III. And here's how they intend to get Americans into this new world order. The United States knows through their spies in Russia and China that Russia and China do not intend to do a first strike on American cities. They intend to decapitate the US military with that first strike. And in 1997, our own deep state talked President Bill Clinton into signing a completely revamped US nuclear strategy. The Reagan doctrine was to structure our nuclear forces as to win a nuclear war. They changed all of that in 1997 and restructured the military to absorb a nuclear first strike and then retaliate afterwards. Now you think about that, Nate. From a nuclear point of view, the one who launches, if you have launch on warning, you can see within 20 to 30 minutes, our satellites can tell when Russia and China are launching missiles at the United States. We can launch our missiles before their missiles arrive. And so their missiles hit empty silos, and our missiles are already in the air and hit live targets. So you see, in a launch on warning scenario, the one who launches second wins. But without launch on warning, we get decapitated. And so it's incredible. And I'll tell you, I went on Art Bell, and just after that had happened, and I was telling about PDD 60, and he didn't believe me. So I pulled it up on the Arms Control Today website. Now, PDD 60 is Presidential Decision Directive 60. It's still top secret. But because the Washington Post came out and said, oh no, it's all right, don't worry, we can still launch on warning, Arms Control Today, who helped write it, as big disarmament experts that they are, they came out and said, oh no, you can't launch on warning. And so they revealed in an article by Craig Cernillo, November 1997, armscontroltoday.org. It's still in the archives. You can still read it. He said, no, you can't launch on warning. The order says that American missile forces have to absorb the nuclear first strike and then retaliate as a gesture of goodwill to the Soviet Union that we are not a threat. Now, it's interesting that, how should I say, one of the prominent disarmament experts, Bruce Blair, came out about 6 months ago and said, you know what we need to do with the Biden administration is to revamp our nuclear doctrine to stop launch on warning. And I said to myself when I first read that, I said, wait a minute, doesn't he remember PDD 60? And so I called up Arms Control Today and I said, you know, has PDD 60 been repealed? What is Bruce Blair? I mean, Arms Control Today should know. Bruce Blair is saying we need to get rid of launch on warning, and I'm telling him it's already gone. PDD 60 has never been repealed. It's still top secret. Our military forces practice launch on warning, but they're not going to be allowed to launch on warning. And why is that? Why do the globalists want to absorb a nuclear strike? Because the entire West, Canada, the US, and NATO depend on the US military to protect them. If it's decapitated, our leaders come out of their bunkers and they say, oh, we didn't know this was going to happen. Of course, that's a lie. But now that our military is decapitated, we must join together with other Western countries and have a militarized global government to prosecute war. It's the perfect excuse. COVID won't get you a military government, but a war will, and a decapitation of US military power will get you into a militarized global government. That's why I think it's there.
I don't know.
Yo. I'm just saying, just hearing that alone, it's like, it sounds like they purposely want to destroy the American military just so they could build a NATO military. That's what it's looking like it's about to be. Because I don't think the United States could go against both China and Russia. I feel like they'll have a good chance. And that's what this guy seems like he's saying. He's like, we need the military. Well, they need the military to go down so they could build a stronger one. And that's what I'm thinking NATO is going to do. So just want to add that in there. You know what I mean?
I don't know if I entirely agree with the theory, but in line with your theory, the idea would be that once they had taken out the military bases, then they would have the leverage of holding the cities hostage with the difference of nukes that would exist, that obviously the Russians and the Chinese would have much more nukes left after the smoke cleared. So I think that's what you're suggesting, right?
That's exactly right. The U.S. intelligence knows that Russia and China plan on a nuclear first strike. They know that they plan to hit military targets, not civilian targets, and they're going to use blackmail to get us to succumb and give them control over a new world order. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of stupid conservatives in the United States who are anti-globalist, which is good, think that anything the globalists are against, like in the war on terror, must, you know, they correctly said Iraq was not our enemy. They correctly said Afghanistan was not our enemy. We made them the enemy. And so they incorrectly now state, and Ron Paul, a good friend of mine, is one of those who says this, is that Russia and China are not our enemy. We've made them enemies because we're provoking them. Well, in fact, they are our enemies. They do intend to strike the West. It's just that, libertarians and anti-globalists in the United States tend to be blind to the fact that there are real enemies out there. Now, I'm as anti-globalist as anybody on this planet, but I'm also anti-Russian and anti-Chinese because I know that they're planning on striking the West. Now, here's the question for you, Nate. Why would our globalist government absorb a nuclear first strike? How could they win a war if they did absorb a nuclear first strike? How could they prosecute the war? Because it would take time to regroup under a military new world order. Well, I think part of the answer is the fact that I think we have weaponized space. One of the former defense secretaries under Ronald Reagan spoke at a closed session of one of the big accounting firms. And he said this to the session, and it was leaked out later. He said, "You'd be surprised how much money is going to space that isn't on the budget." He said there's $20 trillion going into space that isn't on the budget. $20 trillion. Now, everything that's going into space that we know about, GPS satellites, surveillance satellites, all of those things are on the budget. If there's 20 additional trillion going into space, it means those are anti-ballistic missiles, I think, that are there so that the U.S. can say or thumb their nose at the blackmail and say, no, we're not going to accept your blackmail. And then they can shoot down any weapon that China and Russia tries to launch on cities after that first military strike, because space-based weapons can hit those missiles in their boost phase before they launch their warheads. You see, you can't stop the warheads. We don't have the wherewithal to do that. But you can hit the missile as it is its slowest apex so that you can actually stop any future nuclear attack on America and give us time to rebuild under a new world order. And that's why I think that's how I think we lose our liberty. And Canada will get into it just like the United States. It's not just the U.S.
You're suggesting that they would use this as an opportunity to impose some kind of martial law or something like that?
Well, there will be martial law when there's an EMP strike and a nuclear strike on U.S. military.
Yeah, that kind of got me right there. See, so I feel like they're waiting for EMP. They're waiting for EMP. That's what's going to change everything. And like I said, I was just speaking to a gentleman earlier today, and a lot of people like, man, if the internet go out or technology go out, man, they ain't going to know what to do. Everybody going to be in the frenzy because everybody's like, nobody knows what technology, like what to do without technology at this time. Pardon me for that. But nobody knows what to do without technology. As I was telling them, like, if you don't have like a country background or a Caribbean background, it's hard to say that you're going to be able to do this and do that without no technology, because most Americans were built off technology, born off technology. So it's very weird to think about not having technology. You know what I mean? That's another topic I got to do too. Living without technology. If y'all do, man, comment and see, let me know if y'all want me to do a topic like that and how y'all want me to talk about it. Let me know. But let me get back to the video.
military targets. I mean, guaranteed. If there's no electricity, there's no order, and there's a Mad Max pillaging, you're going to have martial law. And so,
plain and simple, your business can't scale on QuickBooks. Here are 7 reasons why NetSuite is better than QuickBooks.
So you don't want to have to relocate for safety if you wait until that EMP strike. In the first place, all the freeways and the roads are going to be clogged with people trying to get out of the cities. It's going to be too late. You have to have advance notice. And, you know, even if it's the 20 minutes when you see all the lights go out with an EMP strike, you know there's going to be nuclear strikes on American military targets within 20 minutes. Start getting out now. You've got to have prepared places to go to, of course, to be able to, you know, properly defend yourself. And as I've said in my book, Strategic Relocation, your greatest enemy is population density. If you're in the middle of you know, Ottawa, trying to get out of that city, and you know, or Calgary, any of those cities, is going to be like people getting out of, you know, when the hurricane hit New Orleans. I mean, it was just, the freeways were clogged. There was just no way to go anywhere. And then you're in a sea of freeway locked in, and you're out of gas, and you end up being on foot. And that's just no way to prepare.
So what are some considerations for people on the topic of strategic relocation? Like, what are some of the fundamental principles? You talked about population density. Is there other, you know, primary considerations a person should factor into, you know, because
all right, you know, I done watched over half an hour of this, you know what I mean? And I'm gonna leave it right here. I'm gonna end it on this. But please like, subscribe, hit the notification buttons, and comment. You know what I mean? I want to see some comments. I want to see how y'all feel about this, all this stuff going on. So I'm gonna holler at y'all, man. One.